Title: Medieval Beauty Standards. Were Unholy Description. Tonight, we explore a time when pale skin was power, foreheads were fashion, and beauty could literally kill you. Welcome to the strange and haunting world of medieval beauty standards. A world where powdered lead, missing eyebrows, and towering hats weren't quirks. They were status symbols. From ghostly complexions to eyebrow erasure, this episode uncovers how beauty in the Middle Ages was about class, control, and silent rebellion. Told like a midnight story, this video blends history, humor, and horror to show how far humans have gone in the name of appearance. If you're fascinated by the darker sides of history, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. There's more where this came from. Comment below. Which medieval beauty ritual shocked you the most? Timestamps coming soon. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Tonight, I want you to imagine something strange. What if your entire worth was measured by how close to death you looked? No, not metaphorically, literally. Imagine walking down the cobbled streets of a 14th century town and being admired not for glowing skin or rosy cheeks, but because your complexion resembled a fainting ghost in candlelight. Welcome to the strange, obsessive, and sometimes lethal world of medieval beauty standards. A place where being beautiful could mean being slowly poisoned, eyebrowless, and utterly allergic to the sun. Before we dive deep into this powdered, plucked, and perilous past, hit that like button and subscribe if stories from history's weirder corners are your thing. And hey, drop a comment with your time zone and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing where in the world you all are tuning in from. Now, get comfortable, dim the lights, maybe grab a warm drink, and let's ease ourselves into a time when vanity and agony were best friends in a corseted embrace. In our world today, you might strive for that sun-kissed glow. Maybe you get compliments when you come back from the beach looking like you've been kissed by light. But rewind to medieval Europe. A tan wasn't flattering. It was damning. Back then, a tan meant one thing. You worked, outside, with your hands. You were poor, laboring under the unforgiving sun, probably smelling like sheep. So if your skin was sun-kissed, society assumed you were one of the sheep. Beauty wasn't golden. It was ghostly. Nobility wanted skin so pale, it looked like it had never seen the light of day. Or joy. The ideal face was translucent, like delicate porcelain that might crack if you sneezed near it. If people could see your veins, even better. You were fragile, genteel, too refined to even have a functional circulatory system. But nature doesn't always play along, so people took matters into their own trembling hands. Let's talk makeup, or what medievals used instead of makeup. It's time to meet the main character of the medieval beauty arsenal: white lead powder. This wasn't your average foundation. This was the medieval equivalent of wearing death on your face. Made by soaking lead in vinegar and scraping off the crusty white flakes that formed. Because nothing says radiant like facial corrosion, this powder promised that coveted chalky glow. Just a light dusting could transform you from healthy farm girl to ethereal, ghostly aristocrat. And the side effects? Oh, just mild stuff like headaches, skin ulcers, hair loss, organ failure, and death. But hey, beauty has always had its price, right? Other DIY skin lightening routines included soaking cloths in vinegar and wrapping them around your face overnight, rubbing in crushed pearls and egg whites, which gave the face a matte glaze and a slight breakfast smell, painting your veins with blue pigment so you looked more delicate and transparent. In short, you weren't just faking paleness. You were faking near death. Take Queen Isabel of France, often called the she-wolf of France, but not for her skincare routine. She was known for her icy, otherworldly beauty. Porcelain skin, soft features, a high forehead. We'll get to that in a moment. Rumor has it her attendants mixed crushed lily petals and powdered antimony into her cosmetics. Antimony, by the way, is a toxic metalloid. So yes, she glowed, but possibly because she was radiating actual toxicity. If you think today's obsession with eyebrows is intense, medieval Europe said, "Hold my tincture. Eyebrows. Outside gone. Banned." A high, smooth, uninterrupted forehead was the rage. The goal was to have a forehead that stretched from your brow to the back of your skull. Why? Because it supposedly made women look more intelligent, more noble, and more godly. The less hair, the more divine you seemed. To achieve this, women plucked not just their brows, but also the front inches of their hairline. Some even shaved their hair back inch by inch. Tweezers, pumice stones, and herbal hair removers were involved, many of which contained things like lime, quicksilver, or cat dung. Yes, cat dung. That is not a typo. The result? Portraits of women from this period look serene, pious, and disturbingly aerodynamic. In one 15th century French manuscript, there's a woman depicted gazing solemnly at a book of Psalms. She has a forehead that covers half her face and no eyebrows in sight. That wasn't a mistake by the artist. That was the look. These aesthetics weren't just personal choice, they were social signals. A woman with a vast forehead and snow-pale skin wasn't doing manual labor or getting sunburned in the field. She was educated, elevated, probably smelled like lavender water, and definitely didn't churn her own butter. So, let's review the average noblewoman's beauty regimen. Skin: bleached with vinegar, powdered with lead, and topped with crushed pearls or chalk. Cheeks: a light flush was okay, as long as it looked accidental. Rouge was made from crushed beetles, berries, or occasionally red lead. Because if it didn't kill you, was it even worth it? Brows: eliminated, not shaped, not trimmed, removed from existence. Forehead: maximized. The higher the dome, the higher the status. Veins: painted blue to simulate fragility, because nothing says beauty like vascular cosplay. And this wasn't just for women. Men, especially those in court, sometimes wore light powders or attempted to smooth their skin with herbal tonics. Everyone wanted to look like they might faint at any moment. And we're just getting started. In the next part, we'll explore the strange politics of hair, why medieval women fried their locks for a touch of blonde, why men curled theirs for poetry, and how one hairstyle could cost you your reputation. Plus, we'll look at the architectural wonders of medieval headwear, because nothing says beauty like a hat shaped like a missile silo. So stay tuned for part 2. If this blend of weird history and dangerous beauty routines has you hooked, let me know in the comments. And remember, beauty may be pain, but in the Middle Ages, it was practically a death sentence. Until next time, sleep tight, and maybe don't put any white powder on your face tonight. Welcome back, night owls. If you thought the pale faces and eyebrow-erasing adventures of medieval beauty were extreme, just wait until we unravel what people did with their hair. In a time before bleach kits, salons, or even reliable mirrors, hair wasn't just an accessory. It was a spiritual, social, and sometimes scandalous statement. In fact, a single lock of the wrong color, texture, or visibility could determine if you were considered pure, desirable, or dangerously improper. And yes, urine does make an appearance in tonight's chapter. You've been warned. Let's start with a color: blonde. In medieval Europe, blonde hair wasn't just pretty, it was holy. Saints were painted with golden locks, and even the Virgin Mary, despite almost certainly having dark Middle Eastern hair, was often portrayed as a flaxen-haired beacon of virtue. Artists weren't trying to be accurate. They were crafting symbols. So naturally, everyone wanted in on the celestial look, but very few were born with the golden strands of divine approval, and even fewer kept it into adulthood. So people got creative, very creative. To lighten their hair, women concocted mixtures that read more like potions than products: saffron, ash, and alum. These helped bleach the hair over time. Honey and chamomile added shine and a slight gold tint. Lye and quicklime for the brave, or those with scalp-related death wishes. Urine, because it was believed to lift color. Fresh animal urine was considered the most potent. The source? Often unspecified. And you probably didn't want to know. Once the mixture was slathered on, the woman would sit in the sun for hours, wrapped in white cloth or wearing a mirrored contraption to reflect extra light onto her hair. Think of it as medieval solar charging, except instead of powering your phone, it slowly singed your scalp in pursuit of heavenly beauty. This practice had a name: sunbasking. It was both a beauty ritual and a mild act of masochism. Eleanor of Aquitaine, Queen of France and later England, was famed not just for her political clout, but her striking looks. Chronicles describe her as having golden hair so long it fell like a cape. Whether it was natural or enhanced with a bit of alchemical assistance isn't recorded, but her glow set the standard. Women of the court copied her relentlessly, and the practice of dyeing or lightening hair became widespread among the noble classes. In fact, during her lifetime, Paris saw an uptick in imported saffron, not for seasoning soup, but for brewing hair tonic. If color was about virtue, texture was about status. Long, loose, softly waving hair was the ideal, but only for unmarried women. If your hair was free, so were you, emotionally, legally, and sometimes flirtatiously. Unmarried women wore their hair flowing down their backs, often partially braided, sometimes adorned with ribbons or beads. The look was ethereal, almost fey-like, perfect for festivals, weddings, or religious ceremonies. But once you said "I do," your hair had to say "I'm done." Literally. Married women were expected to hide their hair beneath a veil, wimple, net, or coif, a snug cap. If you were caught flaunting your hair as a married woman, that could be interpreted as anything from vanity to moral decay. At worst, it aligned you with prostitution. Let's unpack the most common forms of married headgear. Wimple, a cloth that wrapped under the chin and over the chest. Think of it as a hoodie for your soul. Coif, a fitted linen cap, often worn under everything else. Hennin, that famous cone-shaped hat with a trailing veil. Iconic, impractical, and basically the Eiffel Tower for your head. These layers weren't just fashion. They were protection against lice, dirt, wind, and prying eyes. But they also became statements. The richer you were, the finer your materials. Silk nets, gold-threaded veils, and velvet hoods. Your head might weigh 5 pounds, but at least you weren't mistaken for a milkmaid. Section 3. Men's hair, flowing power, and poetic curls. Don't worry, men weren't exempt from follicular expectations. A well-groomed nobleman was expected to have shoulder-length hair, gentle curls or waves, fragrance, and softness. Yes, softness. Knights with flowing hair weren't just fighters. They were lovers, poets, and fashion icons. Some even used rudimentary curling irons, metal rods heated in a fire, to get those romantic spirals. This process obviously was risky and often resulted in singed locks or scorched foreheads. But the aesthetic was worth it. In fact, in many medieval romances, a man's attractiveness wasn't described by his strength, but by the luster of his hair. If your locks caught the light just right while you jousted, you were halfway to seduction. Geoffrey Chaucer, writing in the late 14th century, described the squire in the Canterbury Tales as having curly hair that looked pressed into ringlets as if it had been curled by a press. The squire also sang or fluted all the day, because what's the point of having hair like an angel if you don't serenade someone under a tree? Men's hair, while symbolic, was still subject to practicality. During times of war, helmets made long styles less feasible, and men often tied their hair back or wore hoods and coifs under armor. Still, The effort to maintain hair that whispered noble, not laborer, was real. Here's where things get juicy. Not everyone wanted to follow the rules. And when hair was supposed to tell people who you were, bending those rules could be a form of silent rebellion. Some married women wore translucent veils, technically covered, but still flaunting their carefully lightened tresses underneath. Some unmarried women pinned their hair into tight buns, either out of modesty or as a statement against the male gaze. Some noble women wore gold-threaded nets so sheer their hair shimmered beneath like haloed flames. In Florence, there were even moral codes called sumptuary laws that regulated how elaborate your hair could be based on your status. If you broke them, you risked fines, social disgrace, or public shaming. Hair became more than beauty. It was protest, identity, even risk. So next time you complain about split ends or box dye going wrong, just be glad you're not marinating your scalp in ammonia and cowpea while praying for divine approval. In the next part of this series, we'll climb even higher, literally. It's time to talk headwear. From 2-foot hennons to butterfly-winged veils, we'll explore how medieval women turned their heads into monuments, and how sometimes those hats were the most dangerous accessories of all. So if you're enjoying this descent into historical glam and agony, hit the bell, share the episode, and don't forget to comment below. What's the most painful thing you've done for beauty? I guarantee it won't top what's coming next. Stay tuned for part 3. The fashion's about to reach new heights, quite literally. Welcome back, beauty historians and late-night truth seekers. So far, we've explored pale complexions and medieval hair magic. But now it's time to take things above and beyond. Imagine walking into a room and your hat arrives 5 seconds before you do. Welcome to the world of medieval headwear, where elegance meant elevation, and fashion wasn't just bold, it was borderline dangerous. Tonight, we're entering a world of soaring hennons, butterfly veils, sculpted hoods, and architectural headgear that could rival the spires of Notre Dame. Ready to get a little headstrong? Let's rise into the lofty world of medieval millinery madness. Let's start with the queen of medieval headwear, the hennin. You've probably seen one in a fairy tale, the iconic cone-shaped hat, often with a long veil flowing from the tip. It looked like a party hat designed by a cathedral architect. But this wasn't whimsical fashion. This was a status symbol, a vertical power move. Worn primarily by noble women in 15th century France and Burgundy, hennins could tower up to 2 feet tall. The higher your hat, the higher your place in society, and the more likely you were to knock over candlesticks or behead someone with a sudden turn. The classic hennin wasn't just one look either. Single point hennin, your standard wizard hat, but fabulous. Butterfly hennin, featuring wide veils spread like wings, a visual flourish best enjoyed from a safe distance. Heart-shaped escapon, 2 curved rolls of fabric on either side of the head, creating the illusion of a heart or a pair of croissants glued to your temples. Why so elaborate? Because in the medieval world, height equals nobility. Whether it was a building, a hairstyle, or a hat, taller meant closer to heaven and farther from working the fields. Margaret of York, the sister of Edward IV and Duchess of Burgundy, was a hennin enthusiast. Contemporary illustrations show her wearing massive pointed hennins draped in layers of silk. They were so tall that, reportedly, she had to lean forward to pass through doorways. Her headwear wasn't just fashion, it was a flex. When she married Charles the Bold, her wedding hennin was said to be so elaborate it required pins, hidden supports, and at least one lady-in-waiting just to adjust it. Wearing a hennin wasn't as simple as tossing on a hat. First, you had to prep your hair. Remember that hairline we talked about in part 1? The medieval forehead obsession played a key role here. Hair was braided tightly and stuffed inside the hennin, or, in many cases, shaved to make room for it. This left the forehead long, exposed, and perfect for showing off your cranial skyscraper. To stabilize the hennin, a wire or cane frame formed the base. Padding was added inside to prevent slippage. The veil was pinned and sometimes sewn to the cone itself. And yes, weight distribution was a real problem. Some hennens were so top-heavy they'd wobble if the wearer moved too fast. Women learned to walk with slow, deliberate grace, neck straight, eyes lowered. Basically, if you didn't already look like nobility, your hat forced you to act like it. Of course, not everyone was a fan. Clergy members were especially vocal about the hennin, calling it a symbol of vanity, pride, and even spiritual decay. One bishop famously declared that towering headwear was a horn of the devil leading women astray. Pamphlets and sermons mocked hennin wearers, accusing them of caring more about fabric than faith. And while fashionistas in court didn't care, the criticism did shape public opinion. Some regions even banned certain hennin heights for commoners, reserving the tallest styles for royalty and upper nobility. Because naturally, heaven was a VIP lounge. Now, don't get the idea that every medieval woman wore a hennin. These were elite items, expensive, impractical, and mostly for court life. So what about the women who didn't live in castles? Most wore more practical styles. Linen veils, simple, breathable, often layered. Wimples, covered the neck and chin, great for modesty, warmth, and hiding a bad haircut. Barbettes and fillets, a band and strap combo, often used to secure the veil in place. Hairnets and cauls, nets made from silk or gold threads that enclosed braided hair. Functional, elegant, and less likely to poke out someone's eye. And don't underestimate these simpler styles. Many were embroidered, bejeweled, or subtly structured to show class without collapsing under their own ambition. One mid-15th century account from Bruges describes the wife of a prosperous baker who wore a layered veil and netted caul on feast days. She couldn't afford a hennin, but she accessorized with pearl-tipped pins and fine linen veils stitched with silver thread. The look, chic but attainable. This shows how even non-nobles found ways to express fashion, often pushing the boundaries of their social class. Medieval Pinterest boards would have been wild. Here's something surprising. Head coverings weren't just about fashion. They were about morality. A covered head was a sign of modesty, piety, and respectability. A married woman with an uncovered head could face scandal, shunning, or worse, accusations of impropriety. In some cultures, including medieval France and England, women were legally required to wear veils in public after marriage. This wasn't just social pressure. It was codified. Meanwhile, monks and preachers frequently railed against uncovered female heads, claiming they were tools of temptation. One German preacher warned that a woman's hair is a net to catch the souls of men. Clearly, someone was projecting. Here's where it gets really interesting. Fashion was power. A duchess might wear a towering hennin with a gold-spun veil, not just for the aesthetic, but to assert her dominance in a court filled with rivals. A common woman might sneak in a few luxurious hairpins to appear wealthier, and thereby increase her children's marriage prospects. In medieval Europe, you wore your worth. Quite literally. Your head didn't just carry your thoughts. It carried your rank, your virtue, your ambition, and your social ceiling. Often built of silk, scaffolding, and hope. So next time you wear a beanie or a sun hat, take a moment to appreciate how easy you have it. No wires, no laws, no sermons about your sinful forehead. But the journey through medieval beauty isn't over. In Part 4, we're going back down the face, to the disappearing act of medieval eyebrows. That's right. If you thought modern brow trends were extreme, wait until you hear what people did with lime, arsenic, and a pumice stone just to get that blank, godly gaze. So stay tuned, subscribe if you haven't, and let me know in the comments. Would you rather wear a hennin or shave your head and fake a veil? Choose your aesthetic nightmare. Until next time, walk tall, walk slow, and always duck before entering the room. Welcome back, fellow night scholars. Tonight's subject may seem small, 2 strips of hair above your eyes. But in medieval Europe, eyebrows carried enormous meaning, mostly because the ideal woman had none. That's right. In a time when we now contour, feather, laminate, and obsess over brows, our medieval ancestors were doing everything in their power to make them disappear. So dim the lights, tilt your mirror slightly, and prepare yourself. Because tonight, we're exploring a beauty standard so extreme, it literally scorched people's skin. This is the story of how eyebrows became the enemy. In the 14th and 15th century Europe, especially in courts across France, England, and northern Italy, beauty meant purity, simplicity, smoothness, and nowhere was that more evident than on the face. A smooth, empty forehead was the goal. Remember, this was the age of plucked hairlines and sky-high hennons. The longer your forehead, the more heavenly you looked. So anything that interrupted that divine expanse, like eyebrows, had to go. Eyebrows were viewed as distracting, messy, even vulgar. Poets didn't write odes to your arches. Artists didn't paint fuzzy frames. The ideal was a blank, porcelain browless plane that gave the face a spiritual, otherworldly air. It wasn't about looking human. It was about looking angelic. And angels, notably, didn't seem to have brows in religious art. Coincidence? The medieval world didn't think so. If you think modern brow waxing is painful, buckle up. Medieval women had a toolkit that ranged from the mildly unpleasant to the downright unholy. Tweezers, the most common method. Slow, painful, but effective. Wax and resins, applied warm and ripped away. Medieval spa day. Think again. Pumice stone, rubbed raw across the brow ridge to scrape the hair away and exfoliate your skin into oblivion. Depilatory creams, which sounds innocent, until you read the ingredients. Quicklime, corrosive as bleach. Vinegar, burns in open skin. Arsenic, you read that right. Cat dung, for reasons that are better left in the past. These weren't gentle solutions. These were aggressive chemistry experiments performed on the face, often repeated daily to maintain the clean look. One popular concoction mixed orpiment, a mineral containing arsenic, with lime and vinegar. Applied to the brow area, it dissolved the hair, and sometimes the skin beneath it. But hey, if it meant achieving that heavenly void above your eyes, the suffering was just part of the routine. In a late 14th century court document from Burgundy, a noblewoman is described as radiant and smooth in countenance, with eyes like pearls in snow, unburdened by brow. That phrase, unburdened by brow, was meant as the highest compliment. This noblewoman, whose name was unfortunately not recorded in the document, became a style reference in that region. Ladies began adopting what was known as the clear gaze look: bare brows, pale lids, and high foreheads. Local merchants reported a spike in the sale of depilatory mixtures, and one physician even wrote warnings about daily use of lime, causing a shedding of the skin as from a snake. He was ignored. While women bore the brunt of eyebrow erasure, men, especially those close to court life, occasionally followed suit. Male courtiers sometimes thinned or shaped their brows for elegance. A full removal was rare, but not unheard of, particularly among actors, church officials, or those hoping to emulate classical Roman sculptures, which often lacked pronounced brows. However, for most men, keeping the brows subtly trimmed was enough. The full blank-face treatment remained a feminine domain, associated with chastity, refinement, and elite aesthetic detachment from physicality. We don't have selfies from 1400, but we do have art, and boy, does it back this up. If you look at medieval portraits, especially those of noblewomen, you'll notice something odd. Most of them have faces that look incomplete. The eyes are deep and soulful. The lips are carefully painted, but the brows vanished. Take Rogier van der Weyden's portrait of a lady, circa 1460. The woman is dressed in fashionable headwear, her eyes modestly cast downward, her forehead wide and bare, and her eyebrows utterly erased. Or check out Hans Memling's diptych of Martin van Nieuwenhove. The Virgin Mary, on one panel, has that same luminous, eyebrow-free look. Even the Mother of God, it seems, wasn't spared the trend. Eventually, trends turned. By the late 15th and early 16th centuries, especially in Italy, eyebrows made a cautious comeback. The Renaissance celebrated naturalism and individuality. The rise of artists like Leonardo da Vinci, who obsessed over anatomy and realistic facial expressions, brought the brow back into fashion. Eyebrows returned first as thin arches, barely there but visible. By the 17th century, they were once again being darkened with charcoal, soot, and even mouse fur glued to the forehead. Yes, we'll get to that in a later part. But during the medieval heyday, browlessness was beauty. Here's the big question. Why was this considered beautiful? Some historians suggest that removing eyebrows and enlarging the forehead created a sense of vulnerability, an exposed, open canvas that implied submission, innocence, or ethereal detachment. It erased emotion. Without brows, you couldn't furrow your face. You looked serene, distant, holy. A blank-faced noblewoman seemed untouched by earthly concerns, floating above scandal, labor, or temptation. The less human you looked, the more virtuous you appeared. So next time you pencil in your brows, or follow a TikTok tutorial, remember that not long ago, the highest compliment you could receive was, "I didn't even notice you had facial features." In part 5, we'll take a slightly warmer route. Literally, it's time to talk blush, the red flag of virtue, vice, and possibly vermilion poisoning. From berry juice to crushed bugs to lead-based pigments, we'll explore how color came back into the cheeks. Just not too much, or the church might notice. If you're enjoying this journey through history's most confusing beauty decisions, leave a comment with your brow horror story. And don't forget, every trend has its dark side. In this case, it was arsenic. See you in part 5. Bring your rouge, but maybe skip the bugs. Welcome back, my late-night time travelers. Tonight, we're adding a splash of color to our ghostly palette. After all the pale skin, erased eyebrows, and scorched hairlines, you might think medieval beauty left no room for warmth. But it did. Just a touch. Blush or rouge was the forbidden fruit of medieval makeup. Desired, but dangerous. Celebrated, but suspicious. A flushed cheek could mean you were healthy, fertile, and youthful, or that you were vain, lustful, and possibly in league with the devil. That's right. Tonight, we're stepping into the strange world of blushing with caution, where too much pigment could ruin your soul. And just enough might land you a husband. Medieval beauty didn't demand full color. It wanted the illusion of it, like a secret you weren't supposed to share. The perfect blush was described as a gentle rose hue, the kind that hinted at modest excitement or inner piety. Think I just stepped out into the cold air for 2 minutes? Or I may have just read a slightly risque line in a sonnet. It was a visual cue of vitality and femininity, but it had to look natural. The goal? To appear as though you weren't wearing makeup at all. Sound familiar? Some things never change. So how did medieval women get this elusive glow? Let's look at their blush bar, which included crushed berries, strawberries, raspberries, and cherries were mashed and dabbed onto cheeks. Effective, but temporary, especially if you sweated near a fire or someone kissed your face. Beet juice, a more dramatic stain used sparingly. Red wine sediment, carefully dried and powdered, then brushed on with a cloth. Cochineal, a deep crimson pigment made from crushed beetles, imported at great cost. Rich, potent, and a bug-based luxury. Red ochre, or clay, mixed with animal fat to form a paste. Cinnabar and red lead. Yep, we're back to the poison cabinet. These mineral-based pigments gave a lasting, vibrant flush. And like white lead foundation, they slowly poisoned the wearer over time. Blush was applied using fingertips, scraps of cloth, or wooden applicators. There were no beauty blenders, only instincts and a prayer that your cheek wouldn't swell the next morning. Venetian noblewomen were particularly fond of dramatic rouge. One 15th century recipe included powdered coral ground, sandalwood, vinegar-soaked rose petals, a few drops of mercury. This mixture created a vivid tint that reportedly lasted through the evening dance, but also caused fainting spells, headaches, and irregular heartbeat. Venetian doctors eventually banned it, which only made it more popular. One noblewoman, Isabetta di Montechiaro, wrote in her diary about using the rouge before meeting a potential suitor. Her maid had applied a whisper of red above the jawline using her knuckles. The suitor noticed. They were married the following year. She died 2 years later from a mysterious skin ailment. Coincidence? Who knows? Here's where things get theological. The medieval church was deeply suspicious of makeup, especially blush. To them, painting your cheeks red wasn't just vain, it was morally dangerous. Because color? Color meant temptation. A woman who blushed naturally was blessed. A woman who blushed artificially was trying too hard, probably seducing men, and possibly practicing witchcraft. Seriously, in many religious sermons, rouge was condemned as a tool of the devil. A preacher might say, "She who wears the red of falsehood paints her way to perdition." So how did women get around this? By doing what people always do when the church gets too involved in fashion. They got sneaky. To avoid judgment, women would apply blush lightly and early, then let it settle into the skin before appearing in public. Some rubbed their cheeks vigorously with cloth to create a natural flush, aka the medieval slap technique. Others stained only the very tops of their cheeks, close to the hairline, so it would catch the candlelight but remain hidden in daylight. And of course, if someone commented on your rosy cheeks, the proper response was, "Oh, the wind must have touched me." Blush wasn't something to flaunt. It was something to deny with as much sincerity as you could muster. Not everyone faced the same scrutiny. As usual, class made the rules optional. Noble women could get away with wearing rouge, especially at court or during ceremonies. As long as it was done with taste, whatever that meant, they were admired, not condemned. Peasant women? If they dared to rouge their cheeks, they were often mocked, or worse, accused of prostitution. There was an unspoken line. If you blushed because of who you were, it was elegant. If you blushed to pretend you were someone else, it was scandalous. Sound unfair? Welcome to the Middle Ages. A particularly juicy bit of history comes from a 14th century convent in Provence. A nun named Sister Celeste was caught with a stain of rose upon her cheeks during a feast day. She claimed it was from prayer and excitement. But the abbess found a cloth with beetroot remnants hidden in her bedstraw. The punishment? Not excommunication, just a week of silent penance. And she was forbidden from attending feast days for a year, which, in convent life, was basically being grounded from the only parties you had. Here's the kicker. Blush wasn't just about beauty. It was about control. A perfect flush symbolized fertility, youth, and marriageability. But if you wore it too boldly, or too obviously, it suggested manipulation. You weren't just attractive, you were trying to be, and that was threatening. It all came down to this paradox. Be beautiful, but don't admit you're trying. Glow, but deny the rouge. Blush, but swear it's the wind. Because in medieval society, the line between virtuous woman and temptress was razor thin, and often drawn with beet juice. Next up in part 6, we're heading to the crown of the head. That's right, it's time to talk hair again, but this time we're getting divine. From golden locks symbolizing sainthood to the many concoctions used to bleach and curl hair into submission, you'll learn how a head of hair became a spiritual statement and a scalp became a battlefield. So hit that like button if you haven't already. Subscribe for more dangerously beautiful history. And tell me in the comments, would you risk a little poisoning for a perfect blush? Because in the Middle Ages, they absolutely did. Welcome back, brave explorers of the medieval beauty crypt. So far, we've talked ghostly skin, vanishing eyebrows, and the forbidden flirtation of blush. But now we ascend, literally, to the top of the head. Tonight, we enter the radiant realm of medieval hair ideals, where the highest compliment you could receive was she shines like the Virgin Mary under moonlight, and the worst insult was you look like a peasant's daughter who wrestles geese. Welcome to the era where blonde hair meant holiness, brown hair meant blandness, and your tresses were subjected to more chemistry than a wizard's cauldron. This is the tale of divine strands and questionable science. In medieval Europe, blonde wasn't just beautiful, it was sacred. Golden hair was associated with purity, youth, virginity. And most of all, the divine religious art constantly showed the Virgin Mary, saints, and angels with golden locks, even though historically and geographically, most of them definitely had darker hair. But realism wasn't the goal. Symbolism was. Blonde equals blessed. And because very few people were naturally blonde into adulthood, the message was clear. If you want to look holy, you're gonna need to fake it. Medieval women didn't have hair dye aisles, so they made their own by mixing up concoctions that ranged from the mildly gross to the medically alarming. Common hair lightening recipes included saffron water, soaked and sprayed in layers, chamomile tea plus lemon juice, still used today, weirdly, ash plus vinegar dash, to dry and bleach the hair shaft, honey plus rhubarb plus stale white wine dash, leave in and bake under the sun. Urine, fresh, human, or animal. Probably not your own. That would be weird. The process was called sunbasking. Women applied the mixture to their hair, covered it with a light veil or reflective foil made from beaten metal, and sat outside for hours. The idea was that sunlight would bless the hair into a golden sheen. Did it work? Sort of. If you were already fair-haired, the results could be stunning. If not, you just smelled like ammonia and had dry hay growing out of your skull. Giovanna, the wife of Lorenzo Tornabuoni in Renaissance Florence, was famously depicted by artist Ghirlandaio in a fresco where her long blonde hair gleams like silk. Historical records from her family suggest she used a mix of saffron, ash, and goat's urine to maintain her hair tone. It was considered an act of piety to maintain that angelic light. And when her hair began to darken in her 30s, she intensified her treatments. Her letters mention the scalp's tenderness and an increased sensitivity to sunlight, aka chemical burn city. Color wasn't the only factor. Texture mattered. The ideal medieval hair was long loose, if unmarried, wavy, but not frizzy soft, glossy and romantic. Loose hair symbolized innocence and virginity. Hence why unmarried girls could wear their hair down during festivals, weddings, and religious events. But once married, up it went. Hair was braided, bound and tucked into intricate nets, veils, or wimples, not just for modesty, but to show social status and sexual availability. A woman with flowing hair at the wrong time or place. People might talk, or worse, assume. Medieval hair wasn't just hair, it was architecture. Here's what adorned it. Silken ribbons, symbol of youth and flirtation. Glass beads and seed pearls, for special occasions. Embroidered hairnets, cauls, often gold-threaded for nobility. Wireframes, used to sculpt braids or add lift under veils. Linen wraps, both for hygiene and for holding styles in place. These weren't just embellishments. They were identity markers. One look at a woman's head told you her status, her income, her region, and even her marital fidelity. Queen Isabeau's braided hairstyles were the talk of Paris in the late 14th century. Her elaborate plaits were reportedly scented with rose oil and wrapped in veils embroidered with the fleur-de-lis. Chroniclers noted that when she attended court, She was flanked by maids whose entire job was to carry her hair accessories: pins, combs, silk bags of dried herbs. One ambassador even mistook her veil for a halo, which, honestly, was the point. Hair beauty wasn't gendered. Medieval men had their own standards: shoulder-length hair, the golden medium, waves or curls, either natural or enhanced, clean-shaven or well-groomed beards, depending on the century. Scented locks, achieved through infusions of rosemary, lavender, or clove oil. Some men, especially knights, used curling rods heated in coals to create structured waves. This wasn't vanity. It was branding. You weren't just a fighter. You were a gentleman who could slay a dragon and a sonnet. Let's not romanticize too much. This golden obsession came with real risks: chemical burns from harsh lightning agents, hair loss from frequent application of urine and ash, scalp infections from poor hygiene or shared tools, sunstroke from hours of exposure during sunbasking. And the worst? Lead-based powders sometimes applied directly to the scalp to enhance the shine. Yes, lead. Again. In your pores. On your brain. Every day. The price of beauty wasn't just discomfort. It was death in slow motion. So if you're thinking of lightening your hair for summer, maybe just go to a salon. Trust me, your ancestors walked so you could skip the goat pee. In Part 7, we'll explore the war between modesty and seduction, the art of veiling, concealing, and the eroticism of covered hair. Why did a lock of hair slipping from a veil spark rumors? What was the secret language of head coverings? And how did women use cloth to communicate desire and defiance? Like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments. What's the weirdest thing you've ever done to your hair? Bonus points if it didn't involve urine. See you soon in Part 7. Bring a veil. Things are about to get seductive. Welcome back, fellow seekers of historical glam and peril. Tonight, we're venturing into a chapter of beauty that's all about concealment and contradiction. Because in the medieval world, sometimes what you hid said more than what you showed. Hair, which we now flaunt in commercials, selfies, and shampoo ads, wasn't always meant to be seen. In fact, in many corners of medieval Europe, married women were expected to hide their hair completely, not just out of modesty, but to keep temptation at bay. But here's the twist. The more it was hidden, the more powerful it became. So grab your veils, twist up your braids, and get ready to unravel the sensual mystery of covered hair. In the Middle Ages, a woman's hair wasn't just fashion, it was moral terrain. For unmarried women, long, loose hair was acceptable, even celebrated. It signaled purity, virginity, and availability, in a courtship sense, not a Tinder sense. But once you were married, that hair needed to disappear. Across much of medieval Europe, it was socially and often legally required for married women to cover their hair in public. This wasn't optional. A married woman seen with her hair uncovered could be publicly shamed, fined, called immoral, or in extreme cases, accused of promiscuity or infidelity. Why? Because visible hair was considered inherently seductive. And modesty? That was your new job. So how did medieval women hide their alluring locks? Let's open the style chest. Veils, the most basic covering. Often made of linen or fine silk, draped over the head and secured with pins. Wimples, covered the neck and sides of the face. Think, nun aesthetic. Practical, warm, and humility-boosting. Coiffes, a tight-fitting cap, often worn under veils or hats. Functional and secure. Hoods and gorgets. For colder climates, hoods were lined with fur or wool and covered everything short of the eyebrows. Kerchiefs and filles. Lighter cloths for work or casual use, tied under the chin or behind the neck. Layers were often combined. A noblewoman might wear a coif under a veil under a gorget. The effect? Fully cocooned, but never boring. These pieces were often embroidered, bejeweled, or trimmed with lace and gold thread. The message was, I am covered, but I'm not invisible. Caterina Visconti, Duchess of Milan in the late 1300s, was known for her translucent veils. From a distance, she was the image of modesty, her hair fully covered, her face veiled in white. But up close, her veils were so sheer that her platinum blonde hair shimmered through like fire behind parchment. Was it modest? Technically. Was it seductive? Absolutely. Her veils sparked gossip across northern Italy, and one bishop even banned veils of deceitful transparency from cathedral services. Did she stop wearing them? Of course not. She just wore longer ones. Veils weren't just about covering hair. They were a language. Heavy embroidered veils. Wealth. Status. You were not to be approached. Simple linen wraps. Modesty and humility. Worn by widows, nuns, or devout wives. Brightly colored kerchiefs. Youthful. Spirited. Possibly rebellious. A single curl peeking out. Intentionally flirtatious. Like the medieval version of a wink. In some towns, you could read a woman's entire biography by what was on her head. Age, marital status, region, wealth. Even fertility rumors. It was all there, coded in linen folds and silk tucks. Let's get real for a second. The church, poets, and artists may have insisted that veiling was about purity, but the effect of all that concealment was the opposite. Mystery became erotic. The less you saw, the more you imagined. In romantic poetry, lovers often wrote about their lady's hair as though it were a forbidden landscape, a golden forest glimpsed only in candlelight. One knight described his beloved's hair as a sunlit stream, glimpsed through holy fog. In other words, he saw her through a veil, and it wrecked him emotionally. Medieval romance novels, yes, they existed, often included intimate unveilings. A man slowly removing a woman's veil in a candlelit chamber was the height of passion. Not undressing her, just unveiling. Isabella of France, queen consort to Edward II of England, once shocked the court by appearing at a formal banquet without her veil, her hair coiled in braids, completely exposed. She was reportedly trying to make a political statement, an assertion of dominance over a rival noblewoman. But the backlash was immediate. Chronicles from the time called her brazen and wanton, and one bishop condemned her as a harlot in a crown. Ironically, this moment also made her fashion iconic. Within months, young women across England were imitating her braid style, but with veils, of course. The church wasn't subtle on this topic. Clergy routinely preached that a woman's uncovered head invited temptation, disrupted divine order, and reflected spiritual disorder. St. Paul's teachings about women covering their heads in church were repeated constantly. Some convents even banned mirrors so that nuns wouldn't become vanity-struck by their hair under their veils. Yet, as we've seen, devout women still found ways to express identity through cloth. Embroidered symbols, sacred monograms, subtle color shifts for feast days. Covering didn't mean surrendering self-expression. It just meant playing within the rules. As with all fashion rules, some women found ways to cheat the system. Veils with lace borders. Let the hairline show ever so slightly. Split veils. Allowed movement and occasional glimpses. Hair halos. Fine braids coiled around the head like a crown, visible through sheer veils. And then there were the dancers and performers. Allowed, and sometimes expected, to unveil during festivals or pageants. Their hair became part of the spectacle, flowing like golden signals of fertility, music, and spring. They weren't exactly scandalous, but they weren't exactly respected either. So in a world where a loose curl could cause a scandal and a sheer veil could seduce a kingdom, the message was clear. Modesty was never just modesty. It was power. It was mystery. It was marketing. In Part 8, we'll take things skyward again, because it's time to talk about the hats, cones, wings, and architectural chaos that defined the high fashion of medieval noblewomen. Hennons, butterfly veils, crespines, and more. These weren't just accessories. They were social skyscrapers strapped to your skull. If you're enjoying the ride, drop a comment with your favorite fashion rebellion moment from history. And don't forget to veil your enthusiasm with a like and a share. See you in part 8. Keep your curls tucked in. Or not, your call. Welcome back, Midnight Historians. We've powdered our faces, hidden our hair, and flirted with modesty. But tonight, we build. Because in medieval Europe, beauty wasn't just painted or veiled. It was engineered. Tonight's episode is a tribute to one of the boldest, weirdest, and most gravity-defying beauty statements of all time: medieval headwear. These weren't just hats. They were symbols of class, status, architectural ambition, and occasionally physical danger. From pointed hennons to butterfly veils, crespines, and towering coifs, women didn't just wear these, they performed them. So brace your neck, square your shoulders, and let's ascend into the cloud-kissing world of medieval head fashion. If the Middle Ages had a fashion mascot, it was the hennin. You know the one. Cone-shaped, often worn with a sheer veil flowing from the top, like a medieval wedding invitation. But what you might not know is just how tall, varied, and symbolically loaded these hats really were. Average height, 12 to 18 inches. Maximum recorded hennin, over 32 inches tall. Materials: velvet, silk, stiffened linen, gold thread. Support system: wire armatures, pins, padding, prayer. The hennin emerged around the early 15th century, particularly in Burgundy and northern France. It quickly became the hat of choice for noble women who wanted to make it clear they were not going to lower their gaze, or their hat, for anyone. The taller the hennin, the wealthier and more important the woman. Practicality be damned. Margaret of Burgundy was known for a hennin so tall it reportedly swayed slightly when she walked. Her veil was made of translucent silk from Cyprus, and rumor had it she used scented wax to keep the folds crisp. At one banquet, her hennin allegedly brushed a candle chandelier, setting the veil aflame. She didn't panic. A servant extinguished it with wine. She calmly adjusted her crown and kept walking. Iconic. Not to be outdone, the butterfly hennin took things up a notch. Literally. This version featured 2 veils extending outward from the peak like delicate wings, stretched over lightweight wire frames. From the front, it looked like the wearer had sprouted gossamer antennae. From the back, it was a floating halo of silk. The butterfly hennin was French court couture, used for festivals, parades, and the kind of church service where everyone wanted to outbless each other with style. Not all headwear was vertical. Some styles hugged the head and focused on framing the face, or wrapping the hair. Crespines, delicate nets of gold or silver thread, often shaped into small caps and worn to hold braids or buns in place. Cauls, similar nets, sometimes decorated with pearls or gems, often used to show off expensive hair without actually exposing it. Both styles were particularly popular in Italy and Spain, where women used them as a way to say, "I'm modest, but also incredibly rich." A 14th century Spanish inventory lists one of Queen Leonore's headpieces as a gold-threaded caul interwoven with 113 small rubies. She wore it during state visits and religious festivals. It didn't add height, but it radiated wealth. And wealth in the Middle Ages was just as seductive as beauty. We've talked about what the hats looked like. Now let's talk logistics. How did women keep these things on their heads? Wire frames, lightweight metal forms shaped like cones, hearts, or wings. Hair padding. Braids were pinned or stuffed under caps to create a base. Veil pins. Long, often jeweled pins, anchored cloth to scalp or coif. Chin straps. Yes. Some hennins came with discreet ties under the chin. Posture. Crucial. Slouching wasn't just unattractive. It was dangerous. One tilt, and your silk tower became a missile. Many noble women walked slowly and with perfect posture, not out of grace, but because they literally couldn't move too fast without risking a hat collapse. Of course, all this height and silk didn't go unnoticed by the church. Hennons were frequently condemned as symbols of vanity, pride, and excessive wealth. One German preacher called them horns of Satan, raised upon the heads of foolish women, which honestly would make a great punk band name. Some towns passed hat laws, limiting the size or shape of headwear in church or public processions. But these rules were often ignored, or gamed by wearing slightly tilted versions or adding detachable extensions once inside the hall. Fashion always finds a way. More than just accessories, these hats were wearable power plays. A hennon wasn't practical. It was political. It said, "I don't labor. Look how useless my hat is. I am literally above you, spatially and socially. I can afford 4 yards of imported silk to float behind me as I walk." It was aristocracy worn like a lighthouse. You couldn't ignore it. You weren't meant to. Even portraits became showcases. Artists carefully painted the folds, jewels, and embroidery of a woman's headwear, often with more detail than her expression. In those frames, the hat was the personality. So next time you feel self-conscious wearing a wide-brimmed hat or a quirky accessory, remember this. Your ancestors wore literal tents on their heads and called it Tuesday. In Part 9, we'll descend from the sky and talk about the bodies beneath the fabrics. What did it mean to be the ideal body in medieval Europe? Why did thinness suggest holiness, but too thin meant you were dying? And how did corsets, girdles, and posture play into it all? So if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button like you're pinning on a butterfly veil. And tell me in the comments, would you rather wear a 2-foot hennon for a month or shave your hairline back 2 inches? See you in Part 9. Your neck will thank you. Welcome back, brave souls wandering through the hall of medieval beauty horrors. So far, we've examined ghostly complexions, eyebrow extermination, celestial hair, and skyscraper hats. But tonight, we're pulling the camera back to take in the whole body. Because in the Middle Ages, it wasn't enough to have the right face. You had to move, breathe, and exist like someone who had never carried a bucket in her life. Welcome to the paradox of the medieval body. Gracefully fragile, soft, but not fleshy, slim, but not starving, and always on the verge of a poetic collapse. Let's explore how the ideal body was more than appearance. It was an attitude, a status marker, and sometimes a medical mystery. So, what did a perfect body look like in the 14th and 15th centuries? Pale skin, already covered? Check. Narrow shoulders, small, high breasts, a long, elegant neck, slender limbs, delicate hands, a rounded but not excessive belly. The perfect woman looked like she had never touched soil, never eaten a full meal, and was probably nursing an unnamed spiritual sadness. Think. Chronic anemia meets angelic resignation. She was not athletic. She was not curvy. She was willowy, barely tethered to earth, like a saint who hasn't had protein since Lent. Look at the women in Rogier van der Weyden's paintings, like the Descent from the Cross. They're elongated, pale, and haunting. The bodies are narrow, with almost no muscle definition. Their arms hang delicately, like limp silk ribbons, and their eyes suggest they've just remembered a sad poem from childhood. This wasn't just aesthetic, it was symbolic. The less physical power a woman had, the more spiritually elevated she seemed. Let's talk about why the ideal body was so fragile. Because if your body was strong, you were working. That meant manual labor, hauling, milking, harvesting, lifting. Broad shoulders, sun-darkened skin, and visible muscle equals peasant. But if you were soft, pale, and vaguely breathless, that meant you had servants. That meant you could read poetry by candlelight, embroider devotional texts, and walk slowly through gardens, sighing at roses. That meant nobility. This was class performance, broadcast through posture and diet, not just clothing. Clothing helped shape the illusion. Empire-style waistlines, cinched just below the bust, elongated the torso. Flowing sleeves and layered gowns added softness and removed emphasis from curves. Girdles and tight-laced kirtles, the corset's early ancestor, smoothed the waist. High necklines minimized the bust, while decorative belts drew attention to posture and poise. Everything was designed to whisper, not shout. A woman's body was meant to float, not march, to recline and receive attention, not to chase it. Christine de Pizan, one of the first female writers to challenge gender roles, noted in her 1405 book, The Book of the City of Ladies, that ideal women were measured, meek in motion, gentle in voice, and of pleasing shape. Not too large, not too small, but shaped like grace itself. In other words, a soft bell curve of humility. Of course, people didn't diet the way we do now, but the wealthy did pay attention to what they consumed, not out of body dysmorphia, but because of humor theory. You know, that medieval idea that your body was a stew of blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. To stay in balance and maintain a noble figure, women were advised to eat light meals, soups, broth, fruit, avoid hot or coarse foods, use herbs like fennel and anise for digestion, drink small amounts of wine to warm the spirit, stay away from red meat and garlic, which were associated with peasants. The goal: a body that looked unburdened by appetite. Hunger, ironically, was considered a virtue. Here's the twist: being too thin was not desirable. In times of plague or famine, extreme thinness became a red flag. If your face was gaunt or your limbs spindly, people assumed you were sick. Or worse, contagious. You needed a hint of roundness, a soft curve at the hips, a healthy glow in the cheeks, faked with beet juice, of course. Being too thin made you look cursed. So the sweet spot was right between ethereal maiden and actively dying. What about the guys? Men's beauty standards were also rooted in contradiction. Tall, broad-shouldered, flat-stomached, strong legs and arms, but not bulky, graceful posture. Men could show more physical strength, but it had to be refined. Think knight, not blacksmith. Your body was a tool for jousting or dancing at court, not for hauling hay. Poetry praised chiseled jaws, straight noses, and calm, composed energy. Think of a man who could recite Latin while casually holding a sword. That was the vibe. Though slightly post-medieval, Castiglione's writing captured the enduring medieval ideal. A man must be strong of frame, yet soft in word. Fierce in battle, but gentle in love. So, a Renaissance heartthrob. In hose. So, if you're frustrated with modern body image standards, just remember, the Middle Ages expected you to be slender, holy, slightly melancholic, and probably on the verge of fainting. But not because you skipped breakfast, because you were mysteriously poetic. In Part 10, we shift from the body itself to its most expressive feature, the eyes. We'll explore why big, tearful, luminous eyes were the windows to the soul, and why staring into smoke might have been the original eyeliner tutorial. Hit that subscribe button if you've ever faked a cough to seem delicate, and tell me in the comments, would you rather be gracefully thin and admired, or robust and never cold? See you in Part 10. Look down coyly, blink slowly, and prepare to weep elegantly. Welcome back, Twilight Aesthetes. We've sculpted the body, covered the hair, and levitated our hats. But now, it's time to zoom in on one of the most silently powerful features in the medieval beauty canon, the eyes. Forget bold brows or smoky eyes. In medieval Europe, your eyes were supposed to look like you'd just cried about something poetic, stared into the sun while praying, or glimpsed your mortality in a stained glass window. The ideal eyes were large, clear, light-colored, and filled with just enough sadness to make you seem holy. Tonight, we dive into the gaze that launched 1,000 sonnets, the strange hacks to make your eyes glow in candlelight, and how one well-timed blink could win you land, marriage, or at least a raised eyebrow at court. In medieval beauty lore, the perfect eyes had specific traits: large, suggesting innocence and openness; light-colored, especially blue or gray in Northern Europe, symbolizing purity and heaven; moist. No, really. A slightly tearful look was considered emotionally rich. Downcast. Modesty was key. You didn't stare, you glanced. The dewy eye look was the 14th century version of the no makeup trend. You were supposed to appear as though you'd just finished crying for spiritual reasons only. Never over a man. Heaven forbid. How you used your eyes mattered as much as how they looked. Too much eye contact? Bold. Shameless. Possibly French. Too little. Suspicious. Witchy. What were you hiding? The perfect balance? A gentle glance up from lowered lids, timed just right. Women were praised for blushing while looking down or smiling without lifting the eyes. If your eyes glimmered with moral reflection, you were winning. In the Divine Comedy, Dante writes of Beatrice's eyes as two stars that soften the harshest winter. Her gaze is his guiding light, chaste, clear, and powerful enough to carry him through purgatory. That's right. Beatrice saves a man from damnation just by looking at him. That's some strong eyelash game. You didn't have eyeliner, mascara, or concealer. But people still found ways to make the eyes pop. Charcoal or soot was sometimes rubbed near the lashes to darken the eyes and make them seem larger. This was extremely risky and could cause irritation or, in bad cases, temporary blindness. Belladonna, a poisonous plant, was later used to dilate pupils in Renaissance beauty. But in the late Middle Ages, natural lighting and technique were more common. Some women would stand near smoke, yes, on purpose, to make their eyes water and glow. A few puffs of wood smoke equals instant shimmer, at least until the coughing started. Others just relied on good lighting. Standing near a candle or a window in just the right way could make the eyes seem deeper, more luminous, and more emotional. Blue and gray eyes were favored in many medieval regions, especially in England, France, and Germany. Why? Because they were seen as rare. They were associated with divine visions and angelic purity. They photographed well. Okay, painted well. Religious art often gave saints and the Virgin Mary light-colored eyes, even when the saint in question was from North Africa or the Middle East. Artistic truth took a backseat to symbolic beauty. Isabella of Valois, the child queen of England, was famously described as having eyes like early morning mist, soft and unreadable. Chroniclers obsessed over her eyes even more than her political role. Her portraits show an almost unfocused, inward gaze, which was considered ideal. She wasn't looking at the world. She was above it. In romantic culture, eye contact was everything. A woman's glance could signal interest, promise chastity, invite poetry, cause emotional ruin, and men. They weren't immune either. Knights were often described by the brightness or intensity of their eyes. Piercing eyes suggested courage. Clouded eyes suggested heartbreak. But the ultimate romance was a lady who looked once, quickly, then looked away forever, leaving the poor suitor emotionally shattered but spiritually awakened. Because women were often denied public voice or power, eyes became their main expressive tool, in real life and in art. Medieval poetry is filled with the eye that speaks what lips must hide, the glance that wounds but offers no cure. The light in her gaze, brighter than the day star. Eyes were a weapon, a mirror, a prayer. In paintings, women's eyes were often painted larger than anatomically realistic. They were usually turned slightly downward, modest, soft, and ambiguous. The ideal woman in medieval art always seemed like she was remembering something sad, or quietly judging your soul. So the next time you're caught in a daydream, or you tear up watching a sad movie, just know, you're channeling medieval beauty. Eyes that shimmer, speak, and never quite reveal what they're thinking. That's the entire medieval vibe. In part 11, We go from glances to grins, medieval mouth care, lipstick substitutes, and why smiling with teeth was best left to saints, fools, or unfortunate medical cases. Spoiler: you did not want to flash your pearly whites back then. Like this episode? Drop a emoji in the comments and tell me, have you ever mastered the slow, upward medieval gaze? See you in part 11. Don't blink. Welcome back, brave voyagers of vanity past. We've gazed through the tearful, luminous eyes of medieval beauty. But now, let's shift our attention a few inches south, to a part of the face that today might sell lipstick, but in the Middle Ages, it was best kept closed. That's right, we're talking mouths, lips, teeth, breath, and why smiling wide in 1300s, Europe was considered a scandalous flex or a public threat. Tonight, we dive into the quiet drama of medieval oral aesthetics, where beauty whispered rather than shouted, and a smile could say more by saying less. Let's start with the lips. The ideal medieval mouth was small, symmetrical, lightly tinted, but never obviously painted, closed at all times unless praying or singing hymns. Full red lips weren't inherently taboo, but drawing attention to them was. A woman might be praised for having rosebud lips or a mouth like a soft wound in poetry, but if she appeared to enhance it, scandal. Modesty meant not trying, or at least pretending not to. That said, people still wanted a little color. Here's what they used. Beet juice, the most common and accessible, gave a natural red flush. Mulberries and cherries, smashed and dabbed on before special events. Red wine sediment, gritty, but surprisingly effective. Cochineal, a deep red pigment made from crushed insects, imported and rare. Cinnabar and red lead. Yes, back to poisons. These gave a vivid red, but with side effects like dizziness, numbness, and occasionally death. Lip color was often applied using fingers, scraps of cloth, or small sticks. But unlike today's bold lips, this was about suggestion, not saturation. The goal was a natural look that took 3 hours and might kill you. The usual. A lady in waiting to Queen Jeanne, the first of Naples, Lady Alex kept a small pot of crushed coral and wine vinegar, which she applied lightly to her lips with a linen thread. She was never seen applying it in public, only emerging from her chambers with a faint flush of modesty. As one poet put it, she died at 32. Cause unknown, but the pot was later found to contain mercury. Now we arrive at the real horror show, medieval dentistry. Here's the situation. Toothbrushes as we know them didn't exist. Toothpaste? Not really. Some people used chalk, crushed herbs, or wine-soaked cloths. Floss? A dream. Fluoride? A distant fantasy. Sugar? Not common yet, but even basic bread and mead caused decay. Most people had yellow, missing, or rotting teeth by their 30s, if not sooner. That's why you rarely see teeth in medieval portraits. Not just because artists weren't good at them, but because nobody wanted to be remembered showing them. Unlike today, where a wide smile is warm and friendly, medieval etiquette valued neutral or modest expressions. A wide smile could be read as ignorance, drunkenness, moral looseness, mental instability. Polite company kept its teeth behind the lips. Even saints in paintings rarely smiled. If they did, it was faint, serene, and otherworldly, never giddy. You didn't want to look joyful. You wanted to look like you understood suffering elegantly. In a 14th century English priory, a monk named Brother Elias was known for his unusual habit of smiling at visitors and showing a full set of unusually clean teeth. The prior reportedly reprimanded him, saying, "The mouth is for the psalm, not the grin." Elias was reassigned to garden duty, where he presumably smiled at plants instead. And then there was the issue of breath. With no toothpaste and a steady diet of onions, salted fish, and beer, things got intense. To cope, medieval people chewed parsley, mint, leaves, cloves, fennel seeds. Twigs, yes, often frayed to create brush-like ends. These were meant not just to clean the teeth, but to freshen the mouth enough to avoid offense in conversation. And if that failed, people fanned themselves or held pomanders, scented balls filled with herbs, to wave near their own faces or others. Imagine being offered a scented orb as a passive-aggressive way to say, "Your mouth is medieval." Yes, people believed toothaches came from worms burrowing inside the tooth. Treatments included smoking the worms out with burning herbs, drilling into the tooth by hand, removing the tooth with pliers without anesthesia, applying mashed garlic, vinegar, or even heated iron. Needless to say, prevention was key. But even if you had good oral habits, there was no such thing as a whitening strip or Invisalign. So the smart thing to do? Keep your lips together. So the next time you smile wide in a photo, just remember, your medieval counterpart would be scandalized. Lips were best admired when sealed. Teeth were best ignored. And lipstick, only if you liked a side of mercury with your vanity. In part 12, we go deeper still, into the world of scent. With all this makeup and clothing, how did people actually smell? From perfumed gloves to vinegar baths, you'll find out just how medieval society fought the battle against body odor. Drop a emoji in the comments if your smile would have gotten you banished, and tell me, would you rather use beet juice as lipstick or never smile again? See you in part 12. Bring a pomander. It's about to get aromatic. Welcome back, olfactory adventurers. So far, we've seen the medieval world try to look divine with pale faces, golden hair, and 2-foot hats. But tonight, we go beneath the surface, into the world of scent. Because for all the attention medieval beauty paid to appearances, how you smelled could make or break you. Spoiler, bathing was optional. Deodorant was non-existent. And perfume wasn't just cosmetic. It was spiritual, medical, and political. So light a clove candle, hold your breath, and let's sniff our way through medieval Europe's battle with body odor, and how smell became a status symbol. Let's clear something up. People did bathe in the Middle Ages, but not as often, or as thoroughly, as you might like. In early medieval Europe, public bathhouses were common and even communal. Entire neighborhoods shared large tubs, often heated with fire pits underneath. By the 13th and 14th centuries, however, the church began to frown on communal nudity, associating bathhouses with sin and, let's just say, after-hours activities. Once the Black Death hit, fears around opening the pores to illness made full-body bathing seem dangerous. The result? By the late Middle Ages, most people shifted to dry bathing. Dry bathing involved wiping the body with cloths soaked in vinegar, rosewater, or herbal infusions, sprinkling powdered herbs or talc onto the skin, changing linen underclothes regularly to absorb sweat. Outer garments were rarely washed, scenting clothes with sachets, pomanders, or perfumed oils. It was more about managing odor than eliminating it. The goal wasn't freshness. It was floral camouflage. Perfume wasn't mass-produced like it is today. It was expensive, labor-intensive, and often imported from the Islamic world, where fragrance making was far more advanced. Typical ingredients included rose oil musk from deer glands, ambergris, whale secretion, cinnamon, clove, myrrh, frankincense, citrus peels, mint. Lavender perfumes were stored in glass vials, worn around the neck, or dabbed onto handkerchiefs, gloves, hair, and even shoes. The richest nobles perfumed their bedsheets, curtains, and even pets. One Italian countess reportedly bathed her lapdog in a rose-infused wine bath once a week. Pope John, the 22nd, 14th century, was so committed to smelling divine that he had perfumed gloves made for all his cardinals, and insisted that bishops anoint themselves with rosewater before Mass. To smell earthly in sacred space? Unthinkable. Enter the pomander, a small, hollow ball made of silver or gold, filled with scented herbs and resins. People wore them on chains, pinned them to clothing, or carried them discreetly in one hand. They came in various shapes, sometimes even sculpted into tiny skulls or animals. What went inside? Cloves, nutmeg, dried rose petals. Sage resin balls soaked in wine and honey. Pomanders were more than air fresheners. They were protection, thought to guard against illness by filtering bad air. And let's be real, they were also the polite way to handle other people's smells. Aside from perfumes and potions, medieval people believed you could change your scent from the inside. Doctors advised eating fennel for sweet-smelling sweat parsley, to freshen breath, and body violets and rose petals. Added to wine for internal perfume, sage and mint, for digestive harmony, and better-smelling burps. At feasts, nobles often chewed cloves or dipped handkerchiefs in herbal oil to discreetly inhale between bites. It wasn't a party until someone started wafting their napkin, like a desperate noble aromatherapist. Here's the real kicker. Smelling good wasn't just about hygiene. It was about class. If you wore lavender and musk, you were wealthy. If you smelled like tallow and firewood, peasant. If your breath carried wine and cloves, aristocrat. If it carried onions and rye beer, probably a stable hand. Noble women layered scents the way modern influencers layer skincare. One account from 15th century France describes a duchess applying rosemary water to her hands, rose oil behind her ears, and powdered ambergris in her undergarments before dressing. In contrast, the average working woman might splash some vinegar on her armpits and hope for the best. So while medieval beauty rarely spoke about freshness the way we do today, make no mistake, people cared deeply about scent. But it wasn't about being clean. It was about being controlled, covered, fragrant, and, above all, classy. In Part 13, we'll explore how beauty and morality got tangled together. Why were pretty women sometimes treated as holy, and sometimes as witches? We'll dig into the religious baggage behind beauty, and how being too attractive could literally get you exiled. Or worse. Leave A in the comments if you've ever used perfume as armor. And tell me, would you rather wear a pomander for a year, or only bathe twice a year? See you in Part 13. It's time to look holy, but not too holy. Welcome back, medieval truth seekers. We've cleansed, perfumed, and powdered our way through beauty rituals that were dangerous, divine, and sometimes just bizarre. But now, we enter the most perilous territory yet. What happened when beauty wasn't just admired, but feared? In tonight's episode, we step into the uncomfortable space where a beautiful face could be your blessing, or your death sentence. Because in the Middle Ages, beauty wasn't just about status or style. It was about morality. And being too beautiful, too noticed, or too admired could land you in the crosshairs of gossip, jealousy, or the church. Let's uncover how a delicate blush could read as virtue, or vice, and why some women were sainted for their beauty, while others were burned for it. In early Christian and medieval theology, beauty, especially in women, was seen as a potential reflection of divine order. A lovely face could be read as evidence of God's design. A well-proportioned body, clear skin, and serene expression. Proof of inner purity. Light-colored eyes and golden hair. Angel-coded. Saints like Catherine of Siena or Agnes of Rome were described with glowing, gentle features. Always passive, always graceful. Their beauty was often posthumously revealed, as if death itself confirmed their sanctity. But, and this is a big but, the line between holy beauty and temptation was razor thin. Medieval women lived under the spiritual legacy of two figures: Eve, the original sinner, seductress, and bringer of the fall; Mary, the pure, obedient, eternally virgin Mother of God. Women were expected to embody Mary while avoiding the fate of Eve. This meant being beautiful, but not seductive; being graceful, but not flirtatious; being admired, but never appearing aware of it. If you failed that balance, You weren't just called vain. You were labeled dangerous. Beauty was seen as morally neutral only when it was ignored. The moment a woman used it, celebrated it, or, God forbid, benefited from it, it was sinful. This is why women accused of witchcraft, heresy, adultery, poisoning, manipulation were often described as unnaturally beautiful. It was believed they used beauty as a weapon, and since only God could grant true beauty, any allure used against men had to be demonic in origin. In 14th century Ireland, Alice Keitler, a wealthy and well-connected woman, was accused of witchcraft after 4 of her husbands died under suspiciously convenient circumstances. The accusations included sorcery, blood rituals, making potions, and most damningly, using her beauty to seduce men and steal their wealth. She fled before trial. Her maid was tortured and executed in her place. Contemporary records noted Alice was charming and comely past the years of youth, implying her beauty was unnatural, preserved through magic. In other words, she aged too well. Burn her. Saints like Cecilia, Agnes, and Lucy were praised for their chaste beauty, but they also suffered because of it. In their hagiographies, saint biographies, their beauty attracted unwanted suitors, led to attempted assaults, provoked jealous rivals, ultimately caused martyrdom. Their bodies were beautiful because they were God's temples. Their deaths were tragic and proof of virtue. The Church loved this narrative, the holy woman whose beauty tempted evil, but remained untouched. This story, however, set an impossible standard. Die before you're corrupted. Anything else? Suspicious. It wasn't just the Church or men doing the judging. Other women played a role too. In courtly circles, accusations of vanity or immodesty often came from rival noblewomen or ladies-in-waiting. Whisper campaigns included, she shows her hair too freely. She uses colored powders. Her lips are red at dawn. In religious communities, even nuns were monitored for signs of worldly pride. One abbess in the 14th century famously banned any veil trimmed with lace, claiming it tempted the sisters to flirt with sin through ornament. Medieval literature gave us cautionary tales of the two beautiful women. In La Belle Dame, Sans Merci, the beautiful lady without mercy ensnares a knight with her appearance, then vanishes, leaving him cursed. In The Romance of the Rose, beauty is a garden guarded by jealousy, shame, and fear. In The Wife of Bath's Tale, Chaucer explores how appearance, desire, and virtue clash in confusing, often contradictory ways. These tales warned readers, beauty can destroy, especially if it's wielded by a woman who knows she has it. So, if you've ever struggled with the question, can I be beautiful and good? Congratulations, you're not alone. Medieval women lived that contradiction every day, adored in art, praised in poetry, and still punished for being too much. In Part 14, we'll lighten things up, just a bit, as we enter the world of beauty rituals, spells, and medieval DIY hacks. From love potions to hair elixirs, you'll discover how medieval women turned kitchens into beauty labs. Drop Aor in the comments if you've ever felt like you were being judged for how you look. And tell me, would you rather be adored as a saint or accused as a sorceress? See you in Part 14. Bring your mortar and pestle. It's about to get witchy. Welcome back, noble viewers and curious conjurers. We've powdered our faces, climbed inside our hennons, and walked the tightrope between holiness and heresy. But now, we enter the true heart of medieval beauty. The private rituals, the folk remedies, the kitchen table alchemy where magic and self-care met. Because before Sephora, before serums and beauty blogs, medieval women had manuals, herbal scrolls, saintly prayers, and a whole lot of trial and error. Tonight, we peek into the cauldron of history and explore the potions, poultices, and prayers medieval women used to glow, dazzle, or seduce, whether they were saints, sorceresses, or something in between. Where did medieval beauty advice come from? Medical treatises by monks and physicians. Yes, written by men. Herbals, guides to plant-based remedies. Household books passed between noble women. Religious texts containing saint-endorsed cures. And occasionally, grimoire-like volumes with beauty spells. These texts mixed science, superstition, and observation. A tonic for soft skin might sit right next to a remedy to repel demons, because in the medieval worldview, beauty and health were connected to balance, virtue, and sometimes divine favor. Medieval skin goals? Smooth, pale, radiant. Not sunburnt or sweaty. Here's how women tried to get it. Milk baths, especially goat's milk, often combined with honey or rose petals. Almond paste masks, crushed almonds mixed with egg white or wine pear juice, used to fade freckles and purify the cheeks. Cucumber and mint infusions. To cool the complexion and reduce swelling, vinegar rinses. For tightening pores and removing oil. One recipe advises mixing lily root, ground pearl, and rainwater. Left overnight under moonlight and applied before Mass. Was it science? Did it feel magical? Absolutely. A record from her court describes Eleanor using a mixture of rosewater, crushed rosemary, and white wine as a daily facial tonic. Her ladies-in-waiting were taught to steep the herbs at sunrise and strain them through silk, before presenting the morning veil of fragrance. Now that's a skincare routine fit for a queen. Hair needed love too. Recipes for luscious locks included egg yolk and sage. For strength and shine, boiled nettle water. For hair growth, chamomile rinses. To brighten blonde tones, leek juice. Applied to the scalp for volume. Smell not guaranteed. Honey plus rhubarb plus saffron paste. Applied before sunbathing to lighten hair. Want black hair? Use crushed walnut shells or iron filings soaked in vinegar. Want red hair? Boil hibiscus and beetroot. Want to go full alchemist? Some texts suggest blessing the potion 3 times with Psalm 45 before applying. Because God helps those who bleach. Need some natural blush and lip tint. Crushed raspberries plus beeswax. Beetroot juice plus honey wine sediment plus dried rose petals, cinnamon and clove balm, doubled as breath freshener. Some even dabbed dried blood powder. Yes, real blood on cheeks, for that post-confession glow. Would I recommend it? Absolutely not. Was it a thing? Oh yes. Let's get witchy. In medieval folk traditions, beauty wasn't just appearance. It was magnetism. And to enhance it, you brewed a love charm. Rosewater, plus thyme in your bath. Lavender oil in your shoes before dancing, a sachet of dried marjoram, plus nutmeg worn at the waist. Writing the name of a crush in wine lees, and drinking it under a full moon. Maybe don't try that one. And then, there were the darker spells. Hair from your beloved, mixed with herbs and hidden under his pillow. Or praying to Saint Agnes before bed to dream of your future husband. Not exactly FDA approved, but very emotionally medieval. Beauty rituals also included protection. A charm sewn into a dress to prevent freckles. Wearing a ribbon touched by a virgin to ward off pimples. Avoiding looking at a toad at dawn. Yes, that was a thing. Smearing holy oil on the forehead during eclipses to avoid facial marks. Because beauty wasn't just earned. It was preserved against curses, envy, and misfortune. In some regions, women even recited short rhyming prayers as they applied salves or painted their cheeks, transforming vanity into virtue. Saint Agnes guard my glow, let no foul wind lay me low. Poetry plus potion equals protection. So next time you're whipping up a face mask or lighting a scented candle, remember, medieval women did it first, with less science, more saints, and sometimes a sprinkle of danger. In Part 15, our final chapter, we'll look at how it all ended, how Renaissance ideals swept away the medieval aesthetic, and what modern beauty still owes to these forgotten rituals. Drop A in the comments if you've ever made your own beauty potion, and tell me which medieval DIY would you dare try today. See you in Part 15. Let's end with a transformation. Welcome, dear watchers, to the final chapter in our journey through the strange, sublime, and sometimes scary world of medieval beauty. Over the last 14 parts, we've gazed through veils, clutched scented pomanders, whispered prayers while dabbing beetroot on our lips, and tiptoed the line between saint and sinner. But now, we stand at the edge of a new world, the Renaissance, where the mirror tilts, the shadows lighten, and beauty is reborn with bold color, science, and celebration. Tonight, we uncover how the graceful restraint of medieval beauty gave way to the glorious excess of the Renaissance, and how the traces of both still live in us today. Let's open the window and let the light pour in. By the mid-15th century, something changed. Europe, shaken by plague and war, began to look outward again, to classical Greece and Rome, to science, to humanism. Beauty, once a sign of moral restraint, now became a canvas for celebration. The ideal body became fuller, warmer, healthier. Round bellies, soft hips, and flushed cheeks returned as symbols of fertility and abundance. The soul was no longer trapped in the body. It shone through it. Where medieval women were praised for looking like they might faint at any moment, Renaissance women were painted dancing, reclining, laughing. Enter Botticelli's Venus, Leonardo's Ginevra, and Titian's Muses. The Renaissance face told a different story. Skin was still pale, but now glowing, not ghostly. Lips were full, not merely modest cheeks were rosy, as if from dancing, not weeping. Eyes were still expressive, but they looked back confidently. The ideal woman no longer shied away. She met your gaze. Makeup, once morally risky, began to be systematized. Venetian women bleached their hair with sunlight and lemon juice. Italian ladies crafted elaborate face powders, still laced with danger, but now applied proudly. Remember the head cones, heavy veils, and moral corseting of the past? Renaissance fashion ripped them apart. Hair was worn loose, often styled into romantic curls or braids. Necklines plunged, especially in Italy and France jewelry, and color returned in full force. Ruby reds, deep golds, sapphire blues. Portraits showed bare shoulders, soft skin, even nudity in mythological form. This wasn't a loss of virtue. It was a claiming of the body as beauty. Renaissance beauty wasn't just for women. Men began to focus on personal grooming, fitness, fashion, and hair care. Youthful beauty became an asset in politics, courtship, and art. The image of the perfect man was now athletic but poetic, strong-jawed but soft-eyed, draped in rich fabrics with a hint of perfume. In other words, the knight had become a poet in brocade. As humanism rose, so did the doubt about older ideas. Virginity lost some of its symbolic power. Excessive modesty looked outdated. Mortification of the flesh gave way to celebration of the senses, but not everything disappeared. The longing for spiritual beauty, the sad-eyed saint, the ghostly face lit by candlelight, those tropes lived on in later art, fashion, and even Victorian ideals centuries later. Even today, we still flirt with medieval shadows when we romanticize natural beauty, praise effortless looks that are secretly high maintenance, associate mystery, sadness, and fragility with allure. Let's bring it to the now. Modern beauty, with its endless trends and contradictions, still carries traces of medieval rules. No makeup? That's the holy glow of medieval nuns. Waif models and clean girl aesthetics? Echoes of the willowy maiden with downcast eyes. The tension between being admired and being accused of vanity? As medieval as it gets. We've changed our tools, but not always our stories. So, what have we learned? Wandering through 7 centuries of powdered poisons, pear juice masks, and spiritual blush. Medieval beauty was complicated. It was armor. It was performance. It was risk. But it was also a language, spoken in veils and glances and rosewater whispers. And while we've moved forward, we've never fully left it behind. So the next time you do your skincare routine, pose for a selfie, or sigh at your reflection, know that you're part of a long, messy, shimmering lineage of people who tried to look just right under the ever-changing eye of the world. Thank you for joining me on this journey. You've been Radiant Company. If you enjoyed this series, drop a mirror in the comments and tell me which beauty ritual you'd revive, reject, or remix. Until our next story, stay soft, stay strange, and remember, beauty has always been a battlefield, a blessing, and a spell.